Hello to all of you who joined this conference. Today we will be studying conference number 10 of the cycle of 25 conferences that forms Phase B, or second part, of this self-knowledge course. We have already spoken in previous conferences about the initiatory path. This path is made up of 3 great works. These works that we must do are internally represented as mountains to climb, as an analogy for the difficulties that this work itself has. If you reflect on what it is to climb a mountain, you are going to understand why this work is represented like this. Climbing a mountain is actually something very difficult to do, and the higher up, the more efforts and sacrifices are required. And you can see that many people give up at a certain point, and only a few reaches the summit. It is the same process that will live internally the ones who receive this knowledge and start working on themselves. In this and the next 2 conferences, we will be detailing the work on each of these mountains. These 3 conferences are very important, because if we get to really understand beforehand the path and its different steps, we will be able to recognize them once we start living the path. For example, when we talk about the trials that you must live at a certain initiation, you will understand why you are living what you are living at that point. Also, you will know beforehand what you must do to continue advancing, what is the next step to pursue. And even when we talk about the steps to follow to start the path, it is very useful for everyone, because then we clearly know what we must do to start the work. So this information we are receiving here is very important, and it was provided by masters who have already achieved self-realization, to help everyone who is willing to work on themselves, to find the practical tools that can allow them to get to achieve the self-realization. And what is self-realization? It is achieving the liberation of the totality of our soul, the awakening of 100% of our consciousness, and achieving the total union with our own internal being. And this is internally done by climbing these 3 mountains. In today's conference we will be talking about the work on the first mountain, or the first great work of creation that we must do on this path towards self-realization. Then, the objective of today's conference will be to identify when the path of initiation begins, what works we need to carry out, and how the ascent of the first mountain takes place. We all begin this work by receiving this knowledge. Once we receive the knowledge, we come to know that there is an inner path to follow, and that there are techniques and tools that will allow us to start and advance on this path. We all begin as sympathizers of this knowledge, to listen to the conferences and reflect on them. And at that moment 2 paths open up to us. One is the path of those who decide to believe or not believe in the knowledge they are receiving, but who never truly practice it to verify it. They remain stuck at that level of sympathizers. The other path is the one taken by anyone who, having received this knowledge, decides to practice it and verify it for themselves. Everyone who practices this knowledge begins to verify it. They come to check the effectiveness of psychological death, the regenerative process, and the power that they begin to regain as they achieve chastity, and make wise use of their sexual energy. They begin to pay their karmas by making sacrifice for humanity, and the principles of conscious love begin to develop in them. This practical person is the one who manages to light the sacred fire, and begin the ascent of the first mountain, in which the development of his human soul will be achieved. Thus, going from the state of a rational animal, to becoming a true man with a soul, which is a set of forces, powers and faculties that will give him control over himself and all of nature. And it is in the work of the second and third mountains, where he will culminate with the development of his spiritual part, until achieving the complete integration of his being. The first mountain is the mountain of birth of Genesis. It is on this mountain that we will carry out the purification of our gene, which is completely corrupted by all the sexual links and the contamination of our sexual energy. It is also in this mountain that we will learn to be born internally, that is, to create our internal bodies by wisely using our sexual energy in the practice of supersex. The second mountain will be the mountain of death, in which we will carry out the total elimination of our ego, down to its very causes. The third mountain will be more than anything dedicated to sacrifice for humanity. It is important to keep in mind that to begin, and to advance through each of these mountains, constant and joint work on the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness will be essential. To achieve chastity, the purification of energy is absolutely necessary. Everything begins with chastity, and to achieve chastity, the purification of our waters or sexual creative energy is absolutely necessary. Energy needs a certain level of purity to be able to begin to ascend. Contaminated energy will always tend to be expelled from our body, and with it our fire will be expelled. So we must start by elaborating our own energies. We know that the human being is a machine that has 7 centers, 2 upper and 5 lower. These 5 centers do not work with their own hydrogen, which is why the human machine is doing poorly. We know very well that of these 5 lower centers, the first 4 steal energy from the 5th, which is the sexual center. Therefore, no one can reach chastity if he doesn't first organize his human machine. That is, to make these 5 centers or cylinders work properly, each with its own energy. In this way, we can manufacture hydrogen 12, which is that of the sexual center. As long as we don't do this work, it's wasting time, because the sexual part will always be unbalanced, the same as the other centers. Hydrogen 12 is the hydrogen of sex, with which sex works normally, and C12 is already when the sexual energy it is transmuted, by means of scientific chastity. By means of the death of those minute psychic elements, which are manifested at every moment in us, whether it be lust, pride, revenge, hatred, anxiety, etc. All these details are what steal and unbalance the sexual energy, and don't allow a person to reach chastity, since each center is not working with its own energy. One steals from one, other steals from another, they all steal from the sexual center, and in turn the sexual center, in order to function, also steals energy from the other centers, and the human machine is totally unbalanced. This causes a crossing of hydrogens that doesn't bring it to a balance, but rather continues to feed those psychic elements without hope of reaching the path of initiation. Whoever wants to balance his human machine must begin to eliminate from his psychology as many details of the ego as possible. No matter how small their manifestation is, we must ask our Divine Mother for its elimination. We must be at all times in self-observation, identifying the defects that wants to manifest through our feelings, in our thoughts, and in what we do and speak. This to achieve the righteousness in those functions, so that we start saving the energy of the centers and balance the human machine. That way, we will come to truly achieve our goal, which is starting and advancing in the initiatic path. When one begins to work with death in the details, here come the changes of energy in the person. One starts with black mercury, second goes to white, third to yellow, and fourth to red. A single person can only reach yellow. You need to be practicing suprasex with a stable partner to reach the red mercury. Red is already the sacred fire. The sacred fire wakes up and starts moving up the spinal cord. This is the beginning of the work we have to do. There is no other way to start the first mountain, or the esoteric work. You can search wherever you want, if you don't start there, the work hasn't started. Here the theories die, and the facts are what bring the disciple forward. The alchemical process that makes possible the crystallization of the existential bodies of the being occurs in our spinal column every time we practice suprasex with our partner. There in the sexual center, the 3 alchemical elements must be mixed: mercury, sulfur and salt. We obtain these 3 elements in the constant practice of the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness. Salt is the payment we receive for the sacrificial work for humanity. That is, for our efforts to bring this information, and these tools, to the other brothers of humanity so that they can awaken their consciences. Sulfur is all the essences or sparks of consciousness that we release every time that we ask for the elimination of each psychological defect that we manage to observe and understand. Mercury is the sexual energy that we are saving and purifying. This energy needs to reach an optimal level of purity so that the sacred fire of Kundalini is ignited in our spine. When we have already taken our mercury to yellow, and we have a stable partner of the opposite sex with whom we are successfully practicing the superior sex, we will be subjected to a trial of fire. This is often a situation in which our ability to control our anger is tested. And if we pass that test when we practice sex, the Kundalini serpent will awaken, which is the same as lighting the sacred fire. The mercury turns red, and when transmuting that energy towards our higher centers, it will be transformed into hydrogen C12 with which the existential bodies of the being will be crystallized. From that moment on, every time the person practices supersex, the sexual energy will no longer ascend through the sushumna, but will start to ascend and condense through the nadi chitra, which is where the internal bodies are made. In the first vertebra that we fill with energy, we will receive in the internal worlds a silver sword, which indicates that we are already initiated into the White Lodge. This will be a small sword with a white handle, which immediately must be put on our belt, because the entire Black Lodge will be coming at us to try to take it from us. The Black Lodge will try to tempt us to fall into fornication and adultery, so that we lose that sword. This sword gives us greater power to eliminate our inner Black Lodge, which is our ego, because this represents our willpower. And eliminating our ego would make us increasingly invulnerable to the external Black Lodge, since they can only dominate us through our psychological defects. Coming into possession of that small sword will indicate that we will have already begun the climb up the first mountain. And to advance through each of those steps, or initiations of that first mountain, we will have to constantly be passing certain trials. Among the trials to which the disciple is subjected is first the trial of the guardian, where he has to face his own beast that he has created over the centuries. Second, the trials of the four elements, fire, air, water and earth. In due order, the applicant is submitted. These are repeated to the student many times. It doesn't matter if you have already passed these trials, they are always repeated at other levels, because with these tests the grade is given. After these trials, there follows a series of tests that come upon one, testing one's pride, vanity, lust, hatred, etc. In short, a whole series of tests, since this is a long process, and these tests are repeated over and over again. This is a continuous discipline that the student has to give himself daily, in order to do well on those trials, which are usually very small and more difficult to pass: sentimentality, attachment, material goods, family, etc. In this, we have to polish ourselves a lot, to have understood well in depth the psychological defects, to be able to do well internally. Otherwise, you lose everything, and there you can stagnate until further notice, until you correct it. When one works with hydrogen C12, the sacred fire awakened, the first mountain began to ascend, which are the fire initiations, where according to the psychological work that is being done, the fire ascends more quickly. So you have to balance between death, birth and sacrifice for humanity if you want to advance quickly, because this energy, the sacred fire, ascends with the merits of the heart. An egoist takes much longer, 3 times longer to ascend the fire, since he is a person who wants everything for himself and doesn't teach others. In other words, he doesn't care about humanity, and it is the main thing that the initiate must keep in mind, that if wants to save himself, he must strive to save others, so that they don't fail. That's called love. At the beginning of the work the sword is very small, and as the fire rises, the sword lengthens, until he incarnates the intimate, which becomes the flaming sword, the sword of magical powers, which has powers over nature. Thus, as he gains vertebra by vertebra, the chakras and churches awaken. The initiate governs the 4 elements of nature, as he ascends, until he reaches the 5th initiation of major mysteries, and is qualified as an authentic man. In the 5th initiation of majors is when the initiate chooses between the direct path and the spiral of nirvana. The path is chosen in accordance with the revolution of consciousness. If he is a passive person, well, he chooses the spiral. If he is a revolutionary person, he chooses the direct path. He who chooses the spiral of nirvana is because he is not interested in liberation, and the spiral is not recommended even to the worst enemy, because in that way liberation is never achieved. So the invitation is for those revolutionaries to reflect and risk everything for everything. The direct path brings triumphs, payments that the hierarchies make to those who do that work on themselves. Through the spiral there are no wins or payments or anything. When you choose the direct path, you come to incarnate the triad, Atman, Buddhi, Manas. When one fabricates the causal body, which is Manas, in fact the 2 superior forces are incarnated, and an initiate of the major mysteries remains. He is already converted into a master of major mysteries, mysteries of fire, but we must not confuse the mysteries of fire with the initiations of gold, which are those of the 2nd mountain. When the 3 forces are incarnated within the initiate, he becomes a master. Then he has the right, at the culmination of that mountain, to go to a round and very beautiful chapel, where he can take a break, meditate, recount, or retrospect all his work that he has just done. This is meticulous because there remains a lot of wisdom for the master to manifest later, and then renounce that happiness there, and start the second mountain. When we already possessed a human soul, we can join our divine soul, and from the union of those two souls, human and divine, will be gestated the intimate Christ. This will be the celebration of the Christmas of the heart, which will give rise to the beginning of the ascent of the second mountain. We will talk in detail about the process of the second mountain and the development of the intimate Christ in the next conference. Thank you all very much for having participated in this conference. Remember that you can always send us any questions or doubts you have on the subject, and we will be happy to answer them. Until the next conference.